One of the things that I really emphasize in chapter 4 of my volume is the fact that a lot of the scientific discoveries that we attribute to the great scientists of the early modern period, Copernicus and Galileo and their colleagues, many of these experiments were being done in the 3rd century BCE, and things like the heliocentric universe, the idea that the sun is the center of the cosmos and not the earth. The fact that the heart pumps blood and is not an organ of emotion. The fact that the brain is the seat of the intellect. All these kinds of things which are attributed to modern science were actually discovered and accepted in the 3rd century. And I want to emphasize that, I think, for 3 reasons. One is that I think it's just so important to celebrate those accomplishments. I think the other one is that people tend to think that these ideas must have been suppressed by Christianity. And actually, it was Roman scientists of the 2nd century who were pagans who couldn't accept these ideas and who, in fact, suppressed this information. And I guess that's also the 3rd reason for me, is that even the most sophisticated societies are susceptible to censorship, that even the most amazing human discoveries are not necessarily going to be perpetual. And I think this is kind of a scary object lesson. You know, we think that just because we've discovered something, it's going to be perpetual, and what if that's not true?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that the scientific revolution is a term that's applied to these developments after the fact. And by using the term revolution, which implies an abrupt transition, a rupture with previous ways, it emphasizes, first of all, the drama of the event, and it adds greater prestige to the heroic figures who are highlighted as the antecedents of present-day scientists, whose own prestige is in some ways glorified by their ability to connect themselves directly to this lineage of great heroes in the past. And I don't mean to diminish the accomplishments of scientists in the early modern period in any way by saying this, but what we have to do is to understand the ways in which these scientific researchers were very much products of their own time and place. And they didn't come upon their breakthroughs entirely because they defined themselves totally in opposition to everything that existed in their place. Many of them remained devout and religious in their worldview. It wasn't because they had a secular agenda that they decided to show, their telescopes on the sun and look for sunspots. Far from it. And also, there's ways in which we can think about certain things that we think of as characteristic of modern scientific practice, like the give and take of scientific debate, right? If you imagine the kinds of conversations that take place at international scientific conferences, where scientists from one country who might speak a different language from scientists in another country can meet on the common ground of science and assess carefully and rationally the contributions of other people. Well, those habits of speech, those habits of inquiry, a kind of tendency to avoid emotional language in the defense of scientific theories. All of these actually have their origins. Historians have looked very closely at the rules of etiquette that governed the relationships between gentlemen in the early royal academies. So that Am I exaggerating?
No, I'm just saying, I think that here's where the medievalist in me also wants to say that that's the dialectic model of the medieval university. I mean, that this is a type of give and take of academic debate, which, and of course, I can totally see that there are certain aspects of the protocols governing these things, which might have come from these early modern ideas of etiquette. But I think that this kind of dialogue, we can see it happening in medieval universities as well. The other thing I want to emphasize, but that this comes off of what you were saying, Josh, was that we have to think about these scientists as products of their time. And here's, I think, another really interesting parallel between what's going on in the Hellenistic world of antiquity and what's going on in the 17th century, is that you have these new media for communication. And in the Hellenistic world, it's that Greek has become a universal language, which is uniting practitioners of science in ancient Egypt, in Mesopotamia, in the Near East, in the former Persian Empire, as well as in mainland Greece. And so you basically have this exchange of ideas and observations that have been happening all around the Mediterranean, but that for the first time can be shared in a common language. And then the other thing I would say that's kind of similar to the 17th century is that you have the patronage of princes, and you have princes competing with one another to be the sponsors of scientific discoveries, partly because it enhances their own prestige, but also because they're hoping that these discoveries will lead to useful inventions that, might have military applications. Right. And this makes me think of Leonardo applying for a job with the Sforzas of Milan on the strength of the fact that he could make bombs. And then he ends his letter by saying, "Oh, P.S. I can make pretty pictures too." But he really is emphasizing the destructive capacity of what he can do. Right. So I don't know whether you just.
I actually think we're really in agreement here that whether it's the rules of etiquette that governed relationships between gentlemen in the academies, or whether it's the kinds of dialectical debates that take place on theological matters in the medieval university, the point is that these habits of mind, these habits of inquiry, develop in specific times and places, and they become a part of what we think of as modern scientific practice, not because they're modern, but because they're rooted in the societies from which they arise.